Hi, welcome to the Introduction to 3D Studio Max presented by 3dtotal.com. My name is Isaac Oster. In this lesson I'm going to be talking about creating and editing splines. Most of this lesson will take place in the Command panel, which is here, and the Create and Modify tabs. This is the Create tab, and this is the Modify tab. First of all, we're going to want to select the Shapes menu here. By default it's going to be on Geometry. And then make sure that Splines is selected in the drop-down. I'm going to get started with a line. I can begin to create this line by clicking anywhere in the workspace. If I click and hold down, what I end up with is this rounded curve. And what this is called is a Bezier curve. If I select the first vertex here, it's going to ask me if I'd like to close the spline. In this case, I do. So now I'm going to hop over to the Modifier tab, and what you see is I've got line 001 and line. So if I expand this right here, I get vertex, and you can see that the vertices are highlighted, segment, each span between the vertices is a segment, and then spline. Spline is going to be the whole thing altogether. So if I go to vertex mode, and I select this vertex, you don't see much, but if I come over to that one that I click and dragged, the Bezier, what I end up with are these two little handles on either side of the vertex. And this shape right here is impacted by the angle of the handles here. So if I go to move mode, so I can the hotkey for that is W. I could also hit this icon right here. I can move these around and also scale them to get a different curve profile. Just because I did single clicks on these doesn't mean I can't convert them into Bezier curves if I want. I can right click on this one, and the options are Bezier, corner, and smooth. So with the first option here, Bezier corner, what that's going to do is preserve the hard angle, but give me the ability to modify the incoming segment. If I right click on it again, I can select Bezier, and that'll be what we saw up here. Right click again, I can select corner, and that'll just be a hard uneditable corner. And smooth, which will be a smooth transition with no Bezier handles. You can also select the segment and get a lot of the same functionality. You can switch between line and curve. So if the curve already has, the segment already has some curve to it, and you select line, it'll make a straight line, and you can switch back to curve. But if it was a straight line to begin with, you're not going to see a difference between the line and the curve versions of that segment. If we hop back over to vertex mode, there's some additional functionality I'd like to show you. If you want to add additional segments, you can go to Create Line, and I'm going to turn Snap on. The hotkey for this is S, and if I want to just to confirm that I've got Vertex as a snap option, I'm going to right mouse click and confirm that Vertex is there. So now I can add some additional geometry, and if I wanted to get rid of the segment, I need to go back to Segment. Oh, so I'm still in Create Line mode. I can either turn this off, or I can right mouse click out here, and you'll notice that gets turned off automatically. So back to Segment, select this guy, and just hit the Delete key. So now I've changed the shape, add some additional points here. If I'd like to add a point directly to a segment, there is this Refine section here. So if I hit Refine, I'm going to turn Snap off so that I can click it anywhere. I'll put a point there. And if I go into vertex mode and go to the move option, I can move it just as you'd expect. I can also right mouse click and change the corner around. Just a regular vertex. If you want to break one of these corners, select the vertex, make sure you're in vertex mode, and then hit the break button, and you can select one. You don't want to do a drag select because you'll select both of them, but if you just click, you will get your two verts, in which you notice is one of them is white and one of them is yellow. The white is the what Max considers the start. So there is an option here for automatic welding for the endpoints. So it's set to 0.152. I think that might just be a default setting. But as I bring this one closer, what you'll notice is when it's really close to it, it'll weld back together. If I just want to weld all close verts, there's an option for that. I'm going to get these kind of close together and select them both and hit the weld button. And for now, the distance that they're set to weld at is 0.003 meters, which is a pretty small distance, a lot smaller than this. So I'm going to turn snap back on and just move this directly on top of it and hit weld. And now I've only got one vert there. Alright, the next thing I'm going to talk about is chamfer and fillet, which are located right here. If I select a corner and I click the up arrow next to fillet, you can see what's happening here. I get a nice rounded transition on that corner. Chamfer is going to be something very similar, except it's a hard edge. Okay, the next thing I'll show you is what's called a Boolean operation. So a Boolean is just a combination of two different shapes. So let me delete this guy and make us a couple of circles to demonstrate this. These are sort of primitive versions of splines, and I just need to right click on them and select convert to editable spline. Alright, and I'm going to attach them so they are now one spline object. In order for the Boolean operation to be successful, they've got to be one object. So I'm going to go to spline mode and turn off attach. So I need to scoot this guy so there's an intersection. So the Boolean section is going to be right here. The options are union, subtraction, and intersection. And the order that you select the splines in will dictate some of these behaviors. So with union and intersection it doesn't matter, but with subtraction it does matter. The selection order matters. So I'm going to get the first one and select union and then turn Boolean on and select the second one. And what you can see is it's joined them into one contiguous spline here. So if I hit undo and select subtraction and turn Boolean on and select this guy, it's going to take a byte out. Hit undo, and just to demonstrate the selection order, with subtraction still selected, I select the other one, turn Boolean on, and now I'm going to be subtracting the other circle. Hit undo again, and with intersection it's going to get this part in the middle. Next I want to talk about mirror, so I'm going to make a new spline object and hop over to the Modify tab and select Spline. So this is the mirror section right here. The three options are mirror horizontally, mirror vertically, and mirror both. So if I have about pivot turned off, it's going to use the geometric center, and if about pivot is turned on, then it's going to use the lines pivot, the main object. So with the mirror horizontally selected, I'm just going to hit mirror, and I've got copy turned on as well. So with copy turned off, it'll mirror as you'd expect, the vertical mirror, and this is the combination mirror. If I want to move the pivot to the origin and then mirror across that, I need to go to the third tab here, which is called the hierarchy tab, and when you do that you'll automatically go back to object mode as opposed to sub-object, which is what these are, vertex, segment, and spline for line. Back to object mode, and I will turn effect pivot only on. So when I do this, you see the transform icon becomes a little different looking. I want to make sure I'm in world space, And when I do that, I can look down here and see 0.76 meters and negative 0.73 meters. What that is the position of this in space with this being 0, 0, 0. So if I want to move this here, I can either highlight this and hit 0, or I can right-click on this set of arrows right here, and that'll snap it to 0 as well. So once this is positioned properly, I can turn Effect Pivot off, head back over to the Modify tab, select Spline again, and with About Pivot turned on, when I mirror it now, I'm mirroring it across the axis. If I have Copy turned on and I do it, I'm going to get two versions of the same thing. Alright, next I'd like to talk about rendering splines. If I turn on Enable in Viewport right here, you see the result. I'm going to turn on hit the F4 key to go to wireframe on shaded mode. You can see right here that's shaded with edged faces. So once this is turned on, I have some additional options here. First of all, there's radial and rectangular, and that's the difference between these two. With the radial selected, I can change the thickness, I can change the number of sides, and the angle. With rectangular, I have length, width, angle, and again I can right mouse click on any of these to take them down to their minimum value. And just click and drag up to increase them. So this is Enable in Viewport. If I render this, there won't be anything visible. If I want these to be visible in a render, I need to turn on Enable in Renderer. And there we go. So for Auto Smooth, I'm going to switch back to Radial. What Auto Smooth does is it'll look at the angle between these two surfaces, and if the angle is less than or equal to the threshold, this number right here, the faces are assigned to a common smoothing group. If it's greater than the threshold, then the faces are assigned to separate smoothing groups. So right now it's greater. So if I increase this, you'll see these all end up on the same smoothing group. And even though they still have the same poly count, it's still the same faces, they're being shaded as though the surface is nice and round. So we've talked about line, and we've talked about how to edit a spline. There are some primitive spline shapes here that we can create as well. So if I want a circle, select circle and draw it out. This is editable, but not to the same extent that a regular spline is. You can see we're missing a lot of stuff over here. But I can make some global changes to the shape. In this case, because the circle, it's a fairly simple shape, I can change the radius, and I can change the number of sides that it has. And if I'm ready to move over to the editable section here, I can just right click, go to Convert to, and select Editable Spline, and here we see everything that we would expect to see. I can select Vertex or Segment or Spline and then edit it as I see fit. Back to the Create menu, there's Arc. The way Arc works is you do a click and a drag and release, and as soon as I release, I can modify it like this. And as soon as I click again, it's nailed down, but it's still editable here in the parameters section. I can change the radius, and I can change where it starts and where it ends. Right mouse click to leave create mode, select it and delete. End gone. And end gone is going to draw a polygon shape. You can change the number of sides here in the parameters section. You can change the radius. You can also change the corner radius to smooth those corners out. Text. Pretty obvious. Just create some text. If you want to modify what the text is going to be, no problem. You can change the font. Not every font is going to work if you have something really crazy, but most of the normal fonts that you might find will work just fine. You can increase or decrease the number of curves that it gets, or number of verts it gets around its curves. Rectangle gives you a rectangle, and you can change the length and the width, and again, the corner radius. Ellipse, and we have a length and a width parameter, and again, the number of sides. Donut. So this is a click drag, and then I'm just moving the mouse without anything clicked. We get 2 concentric circles. We can change radius 1. I'm going to hit G to hide the grid to make this a little easier to see. And radius 2. Right click to exit create and delete. Star. As soon as I let go, I get this option. And in the parameters section, I can change any of this stuff. Soften those corners down. And helix. So it's a 3-click operation. The first click draws the initial radius, then I release the mouse. The next drag will control the height, and then I click again, and I get the top radius. What section does is it'll take a cross section, or create a spline that is the cross section of a piece of geometry. So I'm just going to make a teapot, which is a primitive option, and select section, draw it on, and then move it around, and what you can see is where the section intersects with the teapot, there's a little yellow line. So if I right click on it and convert it to an editable spline, and then delete the teapot, I am left with a spline that was where that sectional plane intersected the geometry. So let's go ahead and make some geometry from this stuff. Going to go back to my create circle option, make a circle, and leave it as a primitive. I don't want to convert it to an editable spline. And then I'm going to click on the Modify tab, and this drop down here, the Modifier list, is this great big long list, and there's all kinds of stuff in here. And some of it's relevant to modeling, and some of it's relevant to doing UVs, and some of it's for flipping faces. I mean, there's all kinds of functionality in this list. We're just going to look at a few of these. So to get started, I'm going to click on Extrude. And what this does is it takes that curve and creates geometry in the form of an extrusion up. So I can modify that by changing the amount, change the number of cross segments right here, can toggle whether or not it caps the ends. You can see there's cap start, off and on, cap end, off and on. The output, we're going to want to leave it as a mesh, so we can work on it as a polygon later on. Generate mapping chords has to do with creating UVs, which is something that we'll talk about down the road a bit. And smooth has to do with the smoothing groups, or the shading groups, which is what we talked about earlier. So if I turn, I'm going to hit F4 to go to turn wireframe off. And if I turn smooth off, we can see that face getting faceted. So the reason I wanted to leave the circle as a primitive and not convert it to an editable spline is because I can go back and change those, change the ingredients of it. So I can change the number of vertices around the outside, I can change the radius, and whatever that curve is, it'll just get fed into the extrude modifier. So keeping these modifiers in here is a way of preserving your construction history. So if you need to go back and make some changes, you can do that. If you decide you're happy with the geometry as is and you no longer want to maintain your construction history, you can simply right-click on the object and convert it to an editable poly. If you'd like to delete your modifier, you need to have it selected and then select the remove modifier from the stack icon. It looks like a trash can. So in this case, that's what I'm going to do. I would like to show you another modifier, and this one is called shell. Shell and extrude are very similar. The main difference is you can control the direction and amount of extrusion going in both directions. You can modify the segments as well. Alright, next I want to talk about lathe. The lathe modifier, which will take a curve and rotate it around a center axis. So I'm going to switch to side mode by hitting the L key, which takes us to the left camera, and you can toggle grid off and on. In this case I'm going to leave it on. I want to go to spline mode, back to line, and I'm going to click here, give a nice middle click, and then one at the top. So once that's done, I can switch back to perspective mode, and for right click on the curve to convert it to an editable spline, and select the spline subobject, and then once spline is selected, I can change the outline, which will duplicate. It's essentially the same thing as doing an extrude, but just with the curve. So once that's done, I can hop up to the line again, and from my modifier drop-down, select lathe. Now, what it's done is rotated the curve around the curve's own pivot. What I'd really prefer to have is for the pivot to be on the center line here. So I'm going to go back to my line, hop over to the hierarchy tab, select effect pivot only, and then right click on these two buttons right here, and that'll move the pivot back to the origin. But I'm going to need to delete the lathe modifier and add a new one so that it'll recalculate. And with that done, I get a nice bowl shape. So I still have my construction history, which is going to be useful if I want to soften these edges, which I do. So I'm going to head back over to line, go to segment, select it, go to vertex, grab both of these vertices, and under fillet, just drag this up until it's nice and round. What I have here though is two verts, so I'm going to want to select them and hit weld. Now it's down to one, and I can head back over to my lathe modifier. Now when you look at it, you can see that top is nice and round. So that's just one example of how maintaining your construction history can be very, very useful. I can also come in and change my line around. So if I want to go to vertex mode and refine, and I'll just add a couple of edges here, select them, and move them in, hop back over to my lathe modifier, and now I have a brand new shape. So within the lathe modifier, I can change the sweep, the number of degrees that it will go, change the number of segments. In this case, there's no cap, so these aren't going to make much difference. It was a closed curve to start with. you can control which direction the curve is rotated in. So if I hit the X button, it'll rotate it this way. You go back to the line, you see what it's doing, it's rotating this way rather than this way. And if I hit Y, it's going to go back to the original configuration, and Z, it's just going to rotate it on the Z axis. Within the lathe options, I get something very similar, except rather than being forced into one axis or another, I can rotate so you see the effect of that. And you may notice there's this little belly button here at the bottom, and the reason for that is because I wasn't as careful perhaps as I should have been when I made my original curve. So I'm going to go back to the line and select these vertices, go to move mode. I think I'm actually going to do these one at a time, and just right click and right click and right click. And then this one I don't actually want to be directly at the origin because it'll get a pinch, but I'm going to snap it to the origin and then just move it up a little bit. So now when I hop back over to Lathe, I look at the base and click Weld Core. It's going to be nice and clean. So all Weld Core does is it just welds those verts right here where they meet. So that about does it for this episode. I hope you found it to be informative. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more 3D Studio Max tutorials from 3dtotal.com.